Hi, Tracy. Thank you so much for meeting with me today. If you could just take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us how many years you served as Executive Director for NARAL.
Sure. Hi, I'm Traci Siegel. I was fortunate enough to serve as ED in Maryland NARAL between 1998 and 1999, so about a year and a half, long time ago.
Fantastic. And could you tell us a little bit more about the political environment at the time that you were an Executive Director? What kind of issues were you working on and how did you address these issues?
Sure. So the biggest thing that was on our radar and percolating in the state legislature when I was ED was so-called partial birth abortion, as they called it back then. That was really the big issue. It was what everybody was talking about. And certainly for our supporters, that was the primary thing on everybody's mind. So we had the legislative fight, of course, in the legislature, and we came out victorious, but not without a lot of battle bruises along the way.
Fantastic. And could you highlight some of the tactics that you used in regard to the legislation about partial birth abortion?
So we primarily, it was a lot of education of Maryland NARAL members who, as I'm sure you know, tend to be a very loyal and active group of members. And so it was really educating folks about what was happening in the state legislature, why it was so important, why their rights were actually at risk, and why folks needed to really care about this. And then we had plenty of mechanisms for Maryland NARAL members to contact their state legislators, to do visitation days in Annapolis, to write letters. We had volunteer opportunities to kind of come together and get people to send mailings to legislators. And then, of course, right before I came on board, there had been, it was a bit of a growth period was needed for the organization. They'd been without an ED for a bit. And so we really kind of reinvigorated things at that point and tried to get folks back into the opportunities really to start being vocal in Annapolis.
Thank you so much. And just to follow up on that, what were some of the challenges that you dealt with as an executive director, with regards to either the issue area you were working on or any other issues that you guys were addressing?
Well, that's a great question. When I started, like I mentioned, the organization had been in a bit of a hiatus period. There really wasn't any staff at the time. And so during my tenure, it was really a rebuilding time. We brought on additional staff. I think we went from 1 to 4 while I was there. We reinvigorated the board and added more folks there, added again, like the volunteer opportunities and direct mailing, and really started to reinvigorate the fundraising. So at that point, I think the fact that things had been dormant for a bit was a bit of a challenge because we're kind of trying to restart something and get folks engaged when they hadn't really heard necessarily from Maryland NARAL with the same frequency in recent months. But also just because, in Maryland, people tend to feel like reproductive rights are safe. As they should be, and really needed to underscore and educate folks. And keep in mind, this was quite a long time ago. And so, the idea that that this whole fight could be won or lost on something like a so-called partial birth abortion ban required some education and really getting folks to understand why it was so important. And so that was probably the biggest challenge.
And for anyone in our audience who might not be familiar with what partial birth abortion is, could you talk about what that ban really entailed and why it was so important to address it?
Sure. So it was basically dictating at what point in the pregnancy a woman can actually terminate. The effort there was to say that only in very, very limited cases could a woman have the ability to terminate a pregnancy at certain points. Our argument being that there are plenty of reasons why a woman may need to terminate a pregnancy late, and ultimately this should be a decision for a woman and her doctor, not for legislators.
All right, thank you so much. And just to end with our final question, could you tell us a little bit more about what reproductive freedom means to you now, and if your tenure at NARAL changed that perspective, or if it's something that's been, steady and constant throughout your career.
It's definitely been steady and constant. Certainly, my time at Maryland NARAL only deepened my commitment and resolve, as well as my understanding of the challenges. To me, reproductive rights are just incredibly fundamental. It's a human right. And the fact that at this stage of the game, we are still fighting this battle, and in fact, facing the biggest threat probably that we've seen in a while, given the current makeup of our Supreme Court, shows that this is never something around which we can let our guard down. And it continues to be something that no woman can take for granted. So we all have to stay the course and really stay focused on being smart politically, and in making people understand that this is a right that isn't necessarily guaranteed given our politics.
All right, Traci, thank you so much for speaking with me. It was fantastic just hearing your perspective.
Thanks, Anushka. Have a good day.